Commander Elias Kane walked through the ruins in silence, his boots crunching on the brittle remains of glass and stone that had once been a thriving city. The air was still tainted with the scent of burned alloys and charred wood, remnants of the war that had ravaged this world. Above him, the sky shimmered with a faint haze from orbital strikes, casting the surface in a dull bronze glow. He carried no weapon now, though instinct reminded him of the sidearm at his hip. The war was technically over, but silence always felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Kane's breath came slow, measured, as he moved deeper into the desolate square. A toppled monument lay across the ground, its once proud figure now split in half. He recognized the carving even in ruin. An Andara elder, tall and elegant, their ridged brow and glowing patterns carved with reverence. These people had fought fiercely. They had died even more fiercely. Humanity had not intended their extinction, but wars seldom listened to intention. His earpiece crackled with static. "Commander, the sweep is clear," Lieutenant Marin reported from the orbiting shuttle. "No life signs on the scanners. Place looks dead." Kane paused, eyes scanning the broken buildings around him. "Scanners aren't infallible. Keep comes open." His tone left no room for argument. He cut the line before Marin could reply. The silence pressed closer. He had been on 100 battlefields, seen cities burned to their bones, but something about this place unsettled him. Perhaps it was the absence of bodies. The Andara had vanished in the final months, their numbers collapsing faster than anyone could track. Some whispered they had fled beyond charted space. Others claimed extermination was complete. Kane didn't care for speculation. All he knew was that his boots were walking across the grave of a species. A sound broke the silence, faint, fragile, almost drowned by the shifting rubble under his feet. Kane froze, muscles tightening. He waited, listening. There it was again, a thin, wavering cry, high-pitched, like the whimper of a wounded animal. He moved cautiously toward a half-collapsed structure. Jagged beams jutted at odd angles, the remnants of what might once have been a school or civic hall. Dust motes floated through the fractured light. Kane set his hand against a beam and listened again. The sound was clearer now, a desperate keening that clawed at something buried deep in his chest. Impossible. He muttered. He crouched low and pushed aside a panel of shattered masonry. Beneath, nestled in a shallow pocket of debris, was a small form. Large golden eyes blinked up at him, glistening with terror. Bioluminescent streaks traced delicate patterns across its skin, flickering faintly as though in rhythm with its pulse. Tiny fingers clutched a fragment of cloth, too big for the little hands, an Andara cub. Kane's throat tightened. He had never seen one alive, only in archived images. They were rare even before the war. This one could not have been more than a few seasons old, barely past infancy. The child whimpered again, pulling back as though bracing for a blow. Slowly, Kane extended his hand. "Easy," he whispered, his voice softer than he had ever used on a battlefield. "I'm not here to hurt you." The cub's luminous markings flickered nervously. Its chest rose and fell in rapid breaths. Then, after a long pause, it reached out and touched his glove with tentative fingers. Kane felt the weight of that gesture settle heavily on him. The war had left him numb to death, but this was life clinging stubbornly to the edge of ruin. His training urged him to signal the council. Protocol was clear. Any surviving Andara specimens were to be collected for research, secured, and studied. But another voice stirred in his mind, quieter yet fiercer. He imagined sterile laboratories, scalpels glinting beneath bright lights, the cub's golden eyes staring in fear at beings who saw him as nothing more than data. Kane drew a steadying breath. He should not feel this, not here. Yet memory betrayed him. A boy's laughter, his. Nephew's voice echoed in the back of his thoughts. Small hands gripping his own as he had lifted the child high, years before war had stolen that future. That boy had been lost when Earth's outposts were burned. Kane had buried the grief deep. But this cub's cry pulled it out, raw and fresh. The cub shivered, curling close to him as though sensing his hesitation. Kane slipped his arms beneath the frail body and lifted carefully. The child was light, too light, bones fragile beneath thin skin. Kane pulled his cloak tighter around the cub, shielding him from the cold air. His cum buzzed again. Marin's voice was impatient. "Commander, we're waiting on you." "Nothing down there but dust." Kane swallowed. He could not explain this. "Not yet. Give me 5 minutes," he said curtly, then cut the line. He secured the cub against his chest and stepped back into the ruin-strewn square. As he crossed the shattered street, he felt the weight of the decision pressing harder with each step. He could walk onto the shuttle and follow orders, delivering the cub to a council science ward. That path was easy. But the boy in his arms was the last of a people, the final breath of a civilization erased. To surrender him would be to finish what the war had started. He looked down. The cub's golden eyes were closing, exhaustion overtaking fear. The fragile body sagged against him in trust it could not understand. Kane felt something shift inside himself, a quiet vow forming. When the shuttle came into view, he tightened his hold and whispered the words before he could think twice. "Your name will be Arel, and no one will take you from me." Marin stood by the ramp, arms folded, brow furrowed. "Find anything?" Kane adjusted his cloak so the bundle was hidden. His voice was calm, practiced. "Nothing but ghosts." He walked past the lieutenant and into the shuttle. Behind him, the ruined city lay silent, its last ember carried away in his arms. Kane did not look back. The choice had been made, though he knew the consequences would come swiftly. As the shuttle rose toward the waiting ship, Arel stirred faintly and pressed closer. Kane closed his eyes. For the first time in years, his heart carried something other than war. He carried the future of an entire people, and he knew the galaxy would never forgive him for it. The first days aboard the ship blurred into a quiet struggle that only Kane seemed to notice. To the rest of the crew, it was another journey back to human territory after another war-torn campaign. But beneath his cloak, hidden in his quarters, a fragile life breathed quietly, clinging to survival. Kane spent hours in silence, rocking the cub, listening to the small, almost musical sounds it made when restless. He found himself watching with strange intensity, as if studying every breath. It was a mission in itself. At first, the Cubarel, as he had named him, resisted any touch or gesture. He clutched the torn cloth he had been found with, eyes wide and untrusting. Yet hunger was an enemy neither of them could ignore. Kane tried ration bars, softening them with water, but the child spat them out in disgust, his small body trembling. The smell of synthetic food seemed to pain him. Kane cursed quietly, wondering if he had brought the cub aboard only to watch him starve. It was Rowan who noticed. The ship's medic had been with Kane through countless campaigns, a man of practical mind and blunt words. He caught Kane slipping from the mess hall one evening with an untouched tray and raised an eyebrow. "You've hardly eaten, Commander," he said, voice low. "If you collapse, who's supposed to keep the rest of us alive?" Kane froze. He thought himself careful, but Rowan had always been too perceptive. After a long pause, he gestured for the medic to follow. In his quarters, when Kane pulled back the cloak, Rowan's eyes hardened. "Good God," Rowan whispered. His hands moved automatically, professional instinct overriding shock. He crouched beside the bed where Arel lay curled, skin flickering faintly in the dim light. "You're smuggling a cub." Kane's voice was steady but tight. "I found him under the ruins. He's the last." The Council doesn't need to know. The Council will execute you for this. Rowan examined the cub's frail body, checking pulse, skin, eyes. His tone was clinical, but his frown deepened. He's malnourished, dehydrated. He won't last a week on your stubborn goodwill alone. Kane watched in silence as Rowan fetched a medical kit. The older man prepared a thin nutrient solution, coaxing the cub to drink. Aurel resisted at first, but when the liquid touched his lips, he latched on with surprising strength. Rowan glanced up. You want him alive? Then you listen to me. No improvising with ration bars. His physiology needs care, not guesswork. Kane nodded once, relief washing through him despite Rowan's disapproval. Word spread sooner than he wanted. Marin, the young pilot, caught Kane in the cargo bay 2 days later. Aurel balanced on his shoulder as Kane tried to soothe him. The boys. Luminous markings glowed in distress, casting shifting light against the walls. Marin stopped cold, his face paling. You've lost your mind, he hissed. Do you realize what this means? If the Council scans the ship, we're done. They'll brand us all traitors. Kane's voice was calm but firm. He stays with me. Marin shook his head in disbelief. You're gambling with all of us? For what? A pet project? A symbol of your guilt? The words cut, but Kane did not flinch. He met Marin's gaze with quiet resolve. For a life. The last life of a people we erased. I won't hand him over. Marin's jaw tightened. He looked at the cub, who peered back with golden eyes wide and unblinking. Something in that stare unsettled him. Finally, he swore under his breath and turned away. Fine. But if this ship goes down because of him, it's on you, Commander. Days became a rhythm of secrecy and stolen moments. Kane adjusted his duties to keep Aurel hidden, though it grew more difficult as the cub grew bolder. He wandered. His quarters fascinated by the hum of machinery. The lights that flickered on command, the strange reflections of himself in the mirror. He began to mimic gestures, tilting his head when Kane did, reaching out to mirror the movement of a hand. His voice remained no more than soft tones, but Kane learned to recognize moods in the cadence. High and quick meant hunger, low and drawn out meant fear or weariness. Despite the risks, Kane found himself speaking more often than he had in years. He told Aurel stories in a low voice, memories of Earth's oceans. A forest that whispered in the wind, of stars sailors once navigated by. The cub listened intently, though whether he understood or not, Kane could not tell. Still, the act of speaking eased something long frozen in his chest. Rowan remained watchful. T administered what care he could with limited supplies, warning Kane that the cub's needs would soon outstrip their resources. He won't stay small forever, Rowan said quietly one night. And the older he gets, the harder it'll be to keep him hidden. This can't last. Kane leaned back against the wall, arms folded, eyes on the sleeping child. It only has to last long enough. Rowan frowned. For what? Kane didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. Perhaps long enough for the boy to grow strong, too. Learn trust. Long enough for him to become more than a relic the Council could dissect. The pressure of secrecy grew heavier with each checkpoint they passed. At stations, Kane kept Aurel cloaked in the deepest hold, his heart pounding at every inspection. More than once, he thought he heard scanners lingering too long, questions asked too sharply. But each time, they slipped through. Marin grew increasingly tense, muttering about betrayal waiting to happen. Rowan said little, but his eyes were always measuring Kane, weighing loyalty against reason. One night, when the ship drifted between stars with only the engine's hum to fill the silence, Kane awoke to find Aurel sitting by the viewport. The child's eyes glowed faintly, fixed on the endless void beyond. His small hands pressed against the glass as though trying to touch the starlight. Kane approached quietly, kneeling beside him. "That's the galaxy," he murmured. "Bigger than either of us can understand." Arel turned, making a soft sound, a note that wavered but carried warmth. He leaned against Kane's chest, small, body curling into the crook of his arm. Kane held him, staring out at the stars. He thought of the irony, a hardened soldier entrusted with a fragile survivor of those he had once fought. It felt less like irony and more like judgment. The journey stretched on, but the silence between the crew grew louder. Marin avoided Kane's eyes. Rowan busied himself with endless reports. The ship itself felt watchful, its narrow halls pressing in. Kane knew that truth could not remain buried forever. That knowledge came sharper one evening when Arel's curiosity carried him too far. The cub slipped out of Kane's quarters unnoticed, padding down the corridor with glowing trails flickering faintly in the dark. Marin found him near the navigation console, eyes wide in wonder at the shifting star charts. When Kane arrived, heart pounding, Marin stood rigid. Arel clung to the console, staring at Kane as though expecting rescue. "This is what you're hiding," Marin said flatly. His voice carried none of the earlier panic, only a cold certainty. The last Andara. Kane took Arel into his arms, shielding him. The cub buried his face against his chest, trembling. Marin's jaw worked, fury and something like fear warring in his expression. "Do you understand what you've done? They'll come for him. They'll come for us. You've already sealed our fate." Kane's voice was low, steady. "Then let it be sealed. Some lives are worth the risk." Marin stared at him for a long time, then turned away sharply. "You'll damn us all," he muttered, storming out. Kane stood in the silence, feeling the child's small heartbeat against his chest. Rowan appeared in the doorway, having heard enough. His gaze lingered on Arel, then on Kane. At last he sighed, shoulders sagging with weary resignation. "If you're going to protect him," Rowan said, "then we'll need more than secrecy. We'll need a plan." Kane met his eyes, surprised by the shift. For the first time, the medic's voice carried not only warning, but a hint of reluctant commitment. Kane nodded once, the weight of gratitude, heavy, though unspoken. Arel stirred, humming softly, and Kane felt the vibration through his chest. It was a sound of trust, fragile and incomplete, but enough to steel his resolve. The ship sailed on through the stars, carrying a secret too bright to remain hidden, and Kane knew the storm was only beginning. Yet as he held the boy close, the choice no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a vow. The warning came not from scanners or alarms, but from the sudden tightening in Kane's gut when he saw the message relayed across the comms. A simple dispatch, routine at first glance. Patrols were increasing. Inspections were to be expected. Cooperation was mandatory, but the phrasing was different, sharper, as if someone had caught a scent and was circling closer. Kane read the text 3 times, then closed the file without comment. He had lived through too many campaigns to mistake coincidence for design. Someone knew. He found Rowan in the med bay, cataloging dwindling supplies. The medic looked up, reading Kane's expression before he spoke. "What's wrong?" Kane handed him the data slate. Rowan scanned it once, frown deepening. "They're hunting." Kane nodded. His voice was low, steady. Arel must have been seen. Somewhere, somehow. Rowan set the slate aside, rubbing his forehead. "Then the clock's running out. If the council believes a cub survived, they won't stop. They'll pursue until they have him." His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Kane. "And if they catch us with him, they won't," Kane interrupted. The conviction in his tone was absolute, but Rowan saw the shadow of fear behind it. Later that day, Marin stormed into the mess hall, face pale, eyes blazing. "They know," he said, without preamble. Dockmaster at Argus Station was whispering about a sighting. Said an officer swore he saw an Andara cub with glowing marks. That's no rumor. That's a leak. Kane remained seated, his arms folded on the table, his expression unreadable. Aurel was asleep in his quarters, watched by a proximity sensor Kane had rigged. He kept his voice calm. Then we stay off stations. No ports, no rest stops. We vanish. Moran slammed his palm against the table, rattling utensils. You don't vanish from the Council. You can't. They'll sweep every lane, scan every ship. You're gambling with all of us, for he broke off, teeth grinding. For that child. Kane stood slowly, his height casting a shadow across the pilot. His words came measured, almost quiet, but heavy with steel. For that child, yes. If you're not with me, then step aside, but don't stand in my way. 4. A moment the two men stared at each other, tension thick enough to suffocate. Then Rowan rose from his seat, stepping between them. His voice was firm, unyielding. We don't have the luxury of tearing each other apart. You want to argue morality, do it when we're not being hunted. Right now, we survive. Silence fell. Kane finally looked away, jaw tight. Marin turned sharply, storming out, leaving the air charged with unspoken fury. Rowan watched Kane's eyes narrowing. He's right about one thing, the medic said quietly. You can't outrun this forever. That night, Aurel's curiosity nearly cost them everything. While Kane worked in the command deck, the cub slipped, free, padding softly through the corridors. His glowing patterns shimmered faintly, leaving trails of light in the darkened hall. He reached the galley, where Marin sat alone, head bowed over a drink. The pilot lifted his gaze, froze, and stared. For a long moment, neither moved. The boy tilted his head, curious, unafraid. Marin's breath caught. He had seen countless battles, ships burning, men dying, but nothing unnerved him like those golden eyes meeting his own without fear. Kane arrived seconds later, drawn by the faint hum of Aurel's voice. He scooped the cub into his arms, shielding him from view. Marin rose slowly, his voice low and bitter. So it's true. He's not just a burden hidden in shadows. He's alive, real. Kane didn't answer, only held the child closer. Aurel pressed against him, sensing the tension. Marin shook his head. You don't get it, Commander. If he lives, the Council will tear this galaxy apart to find him. They'll dissect him, clone him, weaponize him. That's what they do. And if they think you're standing in their way, they'll erase you. Us, this whole ship without hesitation. Then let them try, Kane said softly. His eyes never. Leaving Marin's, the pilot turned away, muttering curses, but his voice trembled. He wasn't just angry, he was afraid. The next cycle proved Marin right. Drones swept their sector without warning, long-range scanners cutting through space like nets cast for prey. Kane ordered the ship dark, engines powered down, drifting. Among the shadows of an asteroid field, hours crawled past in silence. Every creak of the hull, every flicker of a console light felt like a beacon screaming their location. Aurel pressed himself against Kane's chest, trembling at the tension that gripped every man aboard. Kane stroked his back gently, whispering words the child couldn't understand but seemed to hear nonetheless. Aurel began to hum softly, the sound low, almost like a lullaby. Against all reason, it soothed Kane's racing heart, eased the taut muscles in his shoulders, he realized, with something like awe, that the cub was trying to comfort him. When the drones finally passed, leaving only silence behind, Rowan exhaled the breath he had held too long. That was too close. Kane nodded. They'll tighten the net. Marin snapped. And when they catch us, what then? What's your brilliant plan when the Council itself blocks every star lane? Before Kane could answer, Rowan spoke. His voice carried a weight none of them expected. "Then we make sure the boy survives, even if we don't." Both men turned to him. Rowan's gaze was fixed on Arel, who now slept in Kane's arms, exhaustion pulling him under. The medic's voice was quiet, resigned. "I've run tests. His cells are different. He carries encoded memory, genetic data tied to his people. He isn't just a survivor, he's their legacy. If he lives, the Andara live. If he dies, they're gone forever." The words settled like lead in the room. Kane felt the truth strike him with the force of a blow. Arel was more than a child. He was history, culture, a civilization's last whisper entrusted to flesh and blood. Rowan looked at Kane directly. Protecting him isn't just sentiment, it's necessity. But that means we stop pretending we can hide him forever. We have to think bigger. Marin's eyes narrowed. Bigger? You mean turning him over to the council? That's what you're hinting at, isn't it? Rowan shook his head. The council would destroy him as surely as Quitshin did. No, I mean finding another way. Allies, a refuge strong enough to resist. Kane's grip on the child tightened. He looked down at Arel, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the galaxy, poised against him. For years, Kane had fought wars on orders he didn't believe, spilled blood in the name of politics that never mattered to the dead. But this was not politics. This was a vow. His voice was quiet, but each word carried the weight of finality. Then that's what we'll do. No council, no surrender. We'll find a place where he can grow, where he can live, where his people's fire won't go out. Marin scoffed, but the bitterness lacked force. He turned away, unable to meet Kane's eyes. Rowan, however, nodded slowly. For the first time, there was no reluctance, no professional detachment, only grim acceptance of the path ahead. The ship drifted out of the asteroid field, engines reigniting with a low hum. Beyond the viewport stretched the endless dark stars. Stars scattered like promises yet to be kept. Kane held Arel close, his heart steady despite the storm gathering beyond the horizon. He knew the council would never stop. He knew the net was closing tighter with every passing hour. But as the cub stirred and pressed small fingers against his chest, Kane also knew surrender was no longer possible. He had chosen his side. The galaxy would come for them, and Kane would be ready. The final message arrived like a blade pressed to the throat, precise and merciless. A council warship had intercepted their vector and was closing in fast. No veiled warnings this time, no diplomatic phrasing. The command was direct. Surrender all cargo for inspection, comply immediately, or be destroyed. Kane read the words in silence, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across his face. He had known this moment would come. The only surprise was how soon it had found them. Marin stood tense at the controls, knuckles white against the console. "They've already locked on us. Their guns are hot. If we try to run, they'll burn us out of the sky." Rowan stepped into the command deck, his expression carved from stone. "Then they'll board. And they'll find him." His gaze shifted to the small figure asleep in Kane's arms, oblivious to the danger pressing in on all sides. Arel's markings glimmered faintly, pulsing with each soft breath. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the low hum of the ship's systems filled the silence. Kane's eyes lingered on the child, his hand steady on the small shoulder. He could feel the boy's warmth through his uniform, fragile yet alive. The weight of a future balanced against impossible odds. "We can't fight them head-on," Marin said at last, his voice edged with frustration. "That's a capital. Ship out there, one barrage and we're debris." Kane's reply came with calm certainty. "Then we don't fight them head-on." Both men looked at him sharply, but Kane was already moving, his mind racing ahead. They'll expect us to surrender to comply. That assumption buys us time, enough to launch a pod, enough to send a rel beyond their reach. Marin's eyes widened. You'd put him in an escape pod. Alone. He won't be alone, Kane said quietly. I'll program the coordinates. There's a colony in the outer veil. One the Council doesn't control. They've sheltered the broken before. They'll shelter him. Rowan's voice was tight, urgent. And what about you? Kane met his gaze without hesitation. I'll stay. Someone has to draw their attention. They won't chase a pod if they believe the prize is still here. If they think the cub is with me, they'll focus everything on this ship. The medic's face hardened. That's a death sentence. Kane's expression did not falter. So be it. Marin's chair scraped back violently as he stood. This is madness? You'd throw your life away for him. You'd burn this ship and everyone on it. Kane's eyes snapped to him, the command in his tone undeniable. No one else has to die. Rowan, you and Marin will take the secondary shuttle. Detach once the battle starts. Get clear, live. But the boy goes in the pod. Marin's protests died on his tongue, crushed beneath the sheer force of Kane's resolve. He looked at Rowan, hoping for support, but found only weary resignation in the medic's gaze. Kane had already chosen, and there would be no turning him aside. The ship shuddered as the Council vessel fired a warning shot across their bow. The coms flared to life, a cold voice filling the cabin. Unidentified craft, you are ordered to power down your engines and prepare for immediate boarding. Non-compliance will be met with lethal force. Kane muted the channel. He carried a rel swiftly to the launch bay, Rowan and Marin following in tense silence. The cub stirred, golden eyes blinking open, sensing the tension that electrified the air. He whimpered softly, clutching Kane's uniform, and Kane bent his head close. Whispering words meant only for the boy. You're going to live. Do you? Hear me. You'll see suns rise over worlds your people never knew. You'll carry them with you. You'll make the stars remember. Arel pressed a glowing hand against Kane's cheek, humming a low, mournful note that seemed to knowing for one so young. Kane's throat tightened, but he did not falter. He set the boy gently in the pod, securing him with straps that seemed far too large. The interior lights reflected off Arel's markings, casting the small chamber in golden light. Rowan stepped forward, placing a hand on Kane's shoulder. There's still time to reconsider. There isn't, Kane replied. There never was. He entered the coordinates, fingers flying across the controls. The pod's engines hummed to life, a soft vibration through the deck. Kane lingered. One moment longer, his hand resting on the transparent canopy. Arel reached up from inside, palm pressed against the glass. Kane placed his hand against it, a silent bond sealed in that fragile touch. Live, Kane whispered. That's all I ask. He triggered the launch. With a hiss of pressure, the pod shot from the bay, streaking into the dark with a flare of light before vanishing into the endless void. Kane stood motionless, watching until it was gone. Only then did he turn back, his eyes hard, his purpose absolute. Get to the shuttle, he ordered Rowan and Marin. Now. The two men hesitated, torn between defiance and loyalty, but Kane's stare left no room for argument. At last they moved, vanishing down the corridor. Kane returned to the command deck, every movement deliberate, controlled. He sat at the helm, powering the ship's systems to full, and transmitted a single message to the Council vessel. You want him? Come take him. The enemy responded with fire. The first volley hammered the shields, rattling the hull with brutal force. Kane's hands flew over the controls, driving the ship into evasive maneuvers. weaving between blasts that lit the void with deadly brilliance. His vessel was smaller, faster, and he wrung every ounce of speed and agility from its battered frame. Explosions tore through space, shrapnel glittering like dying stars. Kane's ship darted and twisted, a lone predator defying a titan. He knew he could not win, but winning was never the point. Every second he kept them chasing. Every shot they wasted on him carried a rel further into safety. His coms crackled, with Rowan's voice urgent and raw. "We're clear of the blast radius. Don't drag this out longer than you need to, Elias. You've done enough." Kane allowed himself the faintest smile. Not enough. Not yet. The Council ship loomed larger on his screens, closing the distance, its weapons primed for the killing blow. Kane's hands tightened on the controls, his breath steady. He thought of the boy's eyes, of the hum of comfort offered in the dark, of the fragile trust placed in hands stained with war. He thought of the promise he had made. When the final barrage came, Kane met it head-on. The ship shook violently, alarms screaming, hull fracturing under the relentless assault. Fire tore through compartments, systems failing one by one. Yet, Kane held course, drawing every gun, every sensor, every eye upon himself. He whispered one last word into the silence. Not for the Council, not even for himself, but for the boy streaking toward a new dawn. Go. The screens flared white as the ship was consumed in fire, far beyond the wreckage. Unnoticed in the chaos, a small pod slipped deeper into the void, carrying with it the last spark of a people thought extinguished. The boy slept, golden eyes closed, his faint markings glowing softly like a heartbeat against the dark. The Council would claim victory. The records would list one more outlaw destroyed. But in truth, Kane's defiance had written a different ending. The last cub, Andara, was not lost. He was carried forward by a soldier's final vow, cradled in sacrifice, bound to a future the galaxy had tried to erase, and somewhere, in the silence between the stars, a people's legacy continued to breathe.